The discovery was both shocking and deeply disturbing. When friends of Travis Alexander became concerned after not hearing from him for several days, they decided to check on him. What they found inside his home would quickly turn into one of the most talked-about crime cases in recent history. Travis was discovered in his bathroom, and from the very beginning, it was clear this was not a natural death. Investigators arrived at the scene and immediately recognized the severity of the situation. The condition of the body and the surrounding evidence suggested a violent struggle had taken place. The crime scene was complex, and every detail had to be carefully documented. Detectives began working methodically, knowing that cases like this often depend on the smallest pieces of evidence. Those who knew Travis described him as outgoing, motivated, and deeply involved in his personal and professional life. The news of his death spread quickly among friends and the community, leaving many in shock and searching for answers. It was hard to understand how something so violent could happen to someone who appeared to be living a normal life. As the investigation began, authorities focused on building a timeline of Travis's final days. They examined phone records, messages, and recent interactions, looking for anything unusual. It became clear that the answers would likely come from understanding who had last seen him and what had happened during those final hours. If you're interested in real true crime stories like this, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because as investigators continued their work, they were about to uncover details that would not only identify a suspect, but also reveal a story far more complex than anyone expected. As investigators worked to build a clearer picture of what had happened to Travis Alexander, their attention quickly turned to the people closest to him. In cases like this, understanding relationships often reveals critical clues. Friends and associates were interviewed, and one name began to surface repeatedly: Jodi Arias. Jodi had been in a relationship with Travis, one that those close to him described as complicated. While it had officially ended, their connection had not completely disappeared. This detail immediately caught investigators' attention, as it placed her within the timeline of his final days. Detectives began looking more closely at her movements, statements, and any communication she had with Travis before his death. At first, Jodi presented herself as cooperative. She spoke calmly and denied any involvement, even suggesting that unknown individuals might have been responsible. However, as investigators compared her statements with the evidence they were gathering, small inconsistencies began to appear. These contradictions raised questions and prompted detectives to dig deeper. One of the most significant developments came when investigators reviewed digital evidence. Photos recovered from a camera found at the scene would later become a key part of the case. These images helped establish a timeline that placed Jodi at the location during the critical period. This was a turning point, as it directly challenged her earlier statements. With this new information, the investigation shifted focus. What had once been a broad search for answers was now narrowing toward a specific direction. Detectives intensified their efforts, working to understand not only what had happened, but why. Public interest in the case continued to grow as more details emerged. If you're following this story, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because as investigators uncovered more evidence, they were about to reveal details that would change everything and expose a truth that had been carefully hidden. As the investigation deepened, detectives focused on the digital evidence recovered from the home of Travis Alexander. Among the most critical pieces was a damaged camera found at the scene. At first, it seemed unusable, but forensic experts were able to recover data from its memory card. What they discovered would become one of the most important breakthroughs in the case. The recovered images revealed a timeline of events that placed Jodi Arias inside the home during the final hours before Travis's death. Some of the photos appeared ordinary at first, showing the two together. But as the sequence continued, the tone changed dramatically. The timestamps told a story that contradicted everything Jodi had previously claimed. Investigators now had something powerful, visual evidence that directly challenged her statements. The timeline established by the images aligned closely with other pieces of evidence, including phone records and witness accounts. This consistency strengthened the case and gave detectives a clearer understanding of what had happened. At the same time, forensic analysis of the scene continued. Evidence suggested a violent and prolonged attack, reinforcing the idea that this was not a random act. Detectives worked to connect every detail, ensuring that the evidence formed a complete and accurate picture. When confronted with this new information, Jodi's version of events began to change. The inconsistencies in her earlier statements became impossible to ignore, and investigators pressed further, seeking the truth behind the shifting narrative. Public attention intensified as details about the case emerged. If you're following this real true crime story, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because with the digital evidence now revealing what really happened, investigators were getting closer to uncovering a truth that could no longer be denied. As the evidence continued to build, investigators pressed harder on Jodi Arias, whose story had already begun to shift under scrutiny. What started as a complete denial slowly turned into a different explanation. Faced with mounting proof that placed her at the scene, she now claimed that masked intruders had attacked Travis Alexander and that she had been forced to flee in fear for her life. Detectives carefully examined this new version of events, but it quickly raised more questions than answers. There was no sign of forced entry, no evidence of additional suspects, and nothing at the scene supported the presence of unknown attackers. The physical evidence told a very different story, one that pointed to a direct and personal confrontation rather than a random act of violence. Forensic experts continued analyzing the scene, focusing on details that could confirm what had truly happened. Blood evidence, patterns within the room, and the overall condition of the space suggested a struggle that escalated over time. These findings directly contradicted the idea of a sudden attack by outsiders. Instead, they pointed toward someone who had been inside the home, someone familiar. As investigators confronted Jodi with these contradictions, her account changed yet again. This time she claimed self-defense, stating that she had acted out of fear during a confrontation. But once again, detectives compared her statements to the evidence, and once again, the details did not fully align. Each new version only deepened suspicion. The more the story changed, the clearer it became that the truth was being concealed. Public interest continued to grow as these developments unfolded. If you're following this case, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because with every contradiction exposed, investigators were closing in on the reality of what truly happened that day. As the investigation progressed, forensic experts continued to examine the evidence in greater detail, focusing on what the injuries could reveal about the final moments of Travis Alexander. The autopsy findings became one of the most critical parts of the case, offering a clearer understanding of the severity and sequence of the attack. Each injury was carefully documented, helping investigators reconstruct what had taken place. The results showed that the attack was both violent and sustained, involving multiple wounds that indicated a prolonged struggle. This directly challenged the claim of self-defense made by Jodi Arias. Forensic analysis suggested that the nature of the injuries did not align with a single act of protection, but rather pointed toward something far more deliberate. Investigators combined these findings with the physical evidence from the scene. Blood patterns, positioning, and the condition of the environment all supported the conclusion that the incident unfolded over time. This was not a sudden reaction. It was a sequence of events that escalated, leaving behind clear forensic indicators. At the same time, prosecutors began preparing their case, knowing that the autopsy evidence would play a central role. It provided a scientific foundation that could not easily be disputed. When matched with the digital timeline and the inconsistencies in Jodi's statements, it strengthened the overall narrative of what had occurred. Detectives also revisited earlier testimonies, comparing them once again with the confirmed findings. The gaps between what was said and what the evidence showed became even more apparent, further weakening the defense. Public attention remained intense as more details came to light. If you're following this real true crime case, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because as the autopsy evidence revealed the true nature of the attack, the case was moving closer to a point where the truth could no longer be denied. As the case moved toward trial, prosecutors began assembling a detailed narrative built around the evidence gathered from the investigation. At the center of it all was the death of Travis Alexander and the growing body of proof that pointed directly to Jodi Arias. What had once been a series of separate findings was now being organized into a clear and compelling case. The prosecution focused heavily on the timeline established through digital evidence. Photos recovered from the camera, along with phone records and travel data, placed Jodi at the scene during the critical period. This timeline was essential because it directly contradicted her earlier claims of not being present. Every piece of evidence reinforced the same conclusion. At the same time, the autopsy findings were prepared to be presented in court. These findings would help explain the nature of the attack in a way that jurors could understand, showing how the injuries aligned with the sequence of events described by investigators. The goal was to demonstrate that the evidence told a consistent story, one that did not support claims of self-defense. Meanwhile, the defense prepared its own strategy, attempting to cast doubt on the prosecution's narrative. They focused on alternative explanations and worked to challenge the interpretation of the evidence. However, the multiple changes in Jodi's statements remained a significant obstacle as they weakened her credibility. As the trial began, public attention reached a new level. The courtroom became the stage where every detail would be examined, debated, and presented to a jury. If you're following this real true crime story, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because as the trial unfolded, the evidence would be tested in full view, bringing the case closer to a final and decisive outcome. As the trial continued, the courtroom became the focal point of the entire case, with every detail of the investigation now being presented before a jury. Prosecutors laid out the evidence step by step, building a narrative around the final moments of Travis Alexander and the role of Jodi Arias. Each piece of testimony added weight to the argument that what happened was not an act of self-defense, but something far more deliberate. Witnesses took the stand to provide insight into the relationship between Travis and Jodi. Friends described the dynamic between them, highlighting patterns that suggested tension and emotional conflict. Their accounts helped establish context, giving the jury a clearer understanding of what may have led up to the incident. Forensic experts followed, explaining the evidence in detail. They broke down the autopsy findings, the timeline, and the physical indicators from the scene. Their testimony was critical in showing how the injuries and evidence aligned with the prosecution's version of events. Each explanation brought clarity, making complex details easier for the jury to understand. When it was Jodi's turn to testify, the courtroom's attention intensified. She presented her version of events, maintaining her claim of self-defense. However, under cross-examination, inconsistencies in her story were highlighted. Prosecutors carefully pointed out the differences between her statements and the evidence, raising doubts about her credibility. As the trial progressed, the tension continued to build. Every argument, every piece of evidence, brought the case closer to its conclusion. Public interest remained strong as people followed each development closely. If you've been watching this case, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because with both sides presenting their arguments, the final decision now rested with the jury, and it would determine how this case would ultimately be remembered. As the trial reached its final stage, the courtroom fell into a tense silence as the jury prepared to deliver its verdict. After weeks of testimony, evidence, and arguments, everything now came down to this moment. The case of Travis Alexander had been laid out in full detail, and the responsibility of deciding the outcome rested entirely in the hands of the jurors. When the verdict was announced, Jodi Arias was found guilty. The decision reflected the weight of the evidence presented, digital records, forensic analysis, and the inconsistencies in her own statements. For many who had followed the case, the verdict confirmed what the investigation had gradually revealed over time. The sentencing phase that followed brought even more emotional intensity. Family members of Travis addressed the court, speaking about the impact of his loss and the pain left behind. Their words served as a reminder that beyond the headlines and courtroom proceedings, this case was about a real life that had been taken far too soon. In the end,
Arias should get life in prison or the death penalty for murdering her boyfriend, Travis Alexander, 7 years ago. After hearing that news, Judge Sherry Stevens brought the jury back into the courtroom and urged them to get back to work and try to come up with a verdict. And they did. They got back to deliberations this afternoon, but they broke for the evening with no resolution. They've been meeting for 4 days now. You'll remember the first jury that convicted Arias of first-degree murder nearly 2 years ago. They also deadlocked on her punishment. They couldn't decide. Now, if this jury can't reach a unanimous decision, the death penalty would be taken off the table for Jodi Arias, and then the judge would decide between life in prison or life in prison with the possibility of parole.
Seems like we sure have heard a lot about Jodi Arias, but today I spent some time with one of Travis Alexander's very good friends who says he wants everybody to know the Travis that he knew.